Welcome to BookPeek, where every story hides a shadow.
Welcome, everyone. You know, it's not every day that a new book from a master storyteller like Stephen King causes this much of a stir. Today, we're going to dive into why his latest novel is turning out to be one of his most divisive ever. I mean, just look at this. The reception for his new book, Never Flinch, is, well, it's completely polarized. You've got professional critics on one side and his army of longtime fans on the other, and they are not seeing eye to eye at all.
So that's the big question, right? What is it about this specific book that's splitting King's audience right down the middle? Let's investigate.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we first have to understand the story King is actually telling. The novel is built around two plot lines that seem to run parallel to each other, but you know they're gonna crash together eventually. Both of them center on a recurring character of King's, Holly Gibney. So, in one story, she's doing this classic detective work, hunting a serial killer, and in the other, she's working as a bodyguard for a pretty high-profile author.
So, how did the pros, the book reviewers, handle this whole setup? Let's take a look at the first piece of evidence.
Well, the official reviews, which are all pulled together by bookmarks, are kind of all over the place. There is absolutely no clear consensus here. You've got everything from glowing raves to a complete and total pan.
On the positive side, you have big names like Publishers Weekly just loving it. They praised the book's structure, they called Holly Gibney a compelling modern hero, even called it a must-read.
But then, even in some of the more positive reviews, like this one from Kirkus, you start to see these little cracks appear. They pointed out some pretty significant flaws, like cliches and character motivations that just didn't quite land, holding the book back.
And then you have critics who are just brutal. The Star Tribune basically called the book a failure, and even pointing to King's own doubts about the novel, which, oh, we are definitely getting to that later.
All right, let's move on to our next set of evidence. This is where it gets even more intense. The reaction from King's incredibly dedicated fan base. Man, across fan forums like Reddit, a lot of longtime readers were just profoundly disappointed. This one user, who says they've read everything King has ever written, calls it his worst book. They just can't believe it came from him. That's a heavy statement. And that feeling was pretty common. The consensus among the unhappy fans was that the story just felt thin, maybe a little lazy, and just not up to his usual, legendary standard. A lot of people complained the plot was just riddled with holes.
So when you bundle all these complaints together, you start to see these core issues rise to the surface. It wasn't just one thing. Fans were getting tired of the main character, Holly Gibney, and were really frustrated with the story's execution. And this all leads to this feeling that one user just put perfectly. The novel was somehow both overstuffed, yet underbaked.
Okay, so if we take all that feedback from the critics and the fans and put it all together, three major points of conflict really stand out as the source of this whole division.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. The very same elements, the main character, the plot, the villain, are being praised and torn apart at the same time. It just depends on who you ask. So what one critic calls a propulsive page-turner, a fan calls implausible. Where one person sees a quintessential King protagonist, somebody else sees an insufferable character they're tired of. It's wild.
Now, one of the sharpest criticisms, which was brought up by the Washington Post and a lot of fans, was King's use of a pretty controversial and, frankly, outdated trope for one of the villains. A lot of critics argued this was a serious and lazy shortcut that really took away from the story.
And that leads us to our final and maybe the most revealing piece of evidence in this whole investigation, what the author himself had to say.
See, tucked away at the very end of the novel, King himself gives us this surprising little piece of context. He admits that this was a really hard story for him to get right.
He reveals that his most trusted reader, who happens to be his wife, Tabitha, also a novelist, had some, let's say, very direct feedback for him after she read that first draft.
Her critique was simple. It was sharp. She told him the story just wasn't working and that he could, quote, do better.
And here it is. This is the crucial point. Even after going back and rewriting it 3 times, the author's own final endorsement feels hesitant. That one phrase, happy enough, it just perfectly captures that lukewarm feeling that so many readers were left with. I mean, come on, that is hardly a ringing endorsement of your own work.
And that's really the provocative thought I want to leave you with. It's a question that cuts right to the heart of the relationship between an artist, their art, and us, the audience, right? Does knowing the author himself wasn't 100% sold on it change how we should judge the final book? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.
Every book is a doorway to another world. Come, explore with us.